So, after a 2-week break, Formula One makes the first of 3 trips to the United States for the Miami Grand Prix. If we cast our minds back to last year, Max Verstappen fought his way from 9th on the grid to win the race in a performance that arguably shattered Sergio Perez's championship dreams for 2023. And the question is, will it be more of the same this year? Having made its calendar debut in 2022, the 19-turn, 5.4km track is the first of 3 races, as mentioned, held in the United States. The track features 3 DRS zones and, like the previous round in China, will host another of this season's sprint races. Before we crack on with the preview though, let's take a moment to refresh ourselves with the championship standings. So after the first 5 rounds of the Formula One Championship, Max Verstappen leads the way with 110 points, followed by teammate Sergio Perez. The Ferrari boys are just behind, with Charles Leclerc leading Carlos Sainz, and the McLarens just behind, with Lando Norris leading Oscar Piastri. George Russell is in 7th, followed by Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton and Lance Stroll closing out the top 10. In 11th, we have Yuki Tsunoda, and in 12th, Ollie Behrman. In 13th and 14th, both the Haas boys, with Nico Hülkenberg leading Kevin Magnussen. The rest of the drivers are yet to score, but could this be the weekend? Leading the Constructors' Championship is Red Bull Racing, no surprises there, and their closest challengers are the Ferrari in 2nd. McLaren are a little bit further back, ahead of the Mercedes and Aston Martin, who are closely grouped together. In 6th and 7th is RB and Haas, and the last 3 teams, Williams, Alpine and Sauber, are yet to score. I am Steph Wentworth, and joining me to preview the Miami Grand Prix is Jake Boxall-Legge and Haydn Cobb. Welcome to you both. How is it going this wonderful morning?
Very good, thank you. Miami was very, very fun last year. I was lucky enough to go, and so I'm a little bit sad to be kind of sitting it out this time. No more JP's Bagels visits or anything like that, but yeah, it was good fun. Maybe it'll be a slightly different experience this year.
Yeah, and I've obviously never been to Miami, given its recency on the track, but it looks a fun one from afar. It certainly looks more fun being there. The fans, the drivers, the media seem to have a great time there. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes, it's quite an exciting one. It's only the 3rd Miami Grand Prix race that we've ever had. But, you know, with it being the 3rd, we've had a couple of races. I think we can safely add our 2 cents on the track. What are you kind of expecting? Are you looking forward to the race weekend, JBL?
I think a little bit less than last year. Again, getting to go, it's a very different experience. There's a lot of bluster about the event, let's say. There's a lot, you'll go there, there's a lot of kind of like American sports stars and things like that. The fact that the kind of paddock was in the middle of the Hard Rock Stadium, that's, very, very unique as well. I think from what I'd heard about the race the first time around in 2022, it sounds like things were massively improved last season. It was really good fun to go and cover. But let's say, and I'm sure we'll get onto this in a little bit, the race was not particularly multi-dimensional. As you said at the top of the show, it was the point where when we were hoping Sergio Perez might be able to give Max Verstappen a run for his money, his hopes were absolutely shattered at that point, and that began a run of some pretty poor results, to be honest. So I'm not especially hopeful about the race, but again, it'll be a fun weekend, and if you like, star spotting and that kind of thing, then it's probably the one for you.
Well, yeah, it will definitely bring the glitz and glamour. It is another sprint race weekend, and based on what we saw kind of during the Chinese Grand Prix sprint, do you think, Haydn, that the changes will help or hinder the race on Sunday?
I think going on what we saw in China, it'll probably end up hindering because, as we've seen even before the changes for this year, the drivers and the teams can learn from what they picked up from the sprint race, whether it's tyre deg, whether it's the stints of what the tyres they use as well, and carry that forward into the race. So it make up for any mistakes that are potentially made. To its credit, the China sprint race I thought was exciting, was compelling. Not that many people saw it, given the time zone it was on at 4 a.m. for the UK audience. But on the flip side, a sprint race in Miami this weekend should therefore suit a European and, of course, a US audience, given the time zone change. So, yes, I think Saturday is going to be an exciting day for Miami. Whether Sunday we're able to live up to that hype quite as much is a bit of a tricky one. From just going purely from China with the sort of two Parc Fermes situation, teams generally were able to learn from their mistakes, let's say, going into the sprint, and make setup tweaks to refine their cars and generally have a smoother things in it in the Grand Prix. I think Mercedes were probably only standouts because they changed setup quite dramatically and split it between the two cars, and if anything they took a step backwards during the Grand Prix. Now, granted, there's various factors involved in it. If you look at Lewis Hamilton's race, obviously starting from so far back, but overall, you would say they'd probably also learned their lessons not to be quite so aggressive going from sprint to Grand Prix. They may be a bit more aggressive going from single practice into the sprint and learning from basically from there on out.
And JBL, it's kind of back-to-back sprint weekend. I know we've had a bit of a break in Formula One, but the last round we did was China, and we had the sprint race there. Do you think Miami is a good choice for this sprint format? How do you reckon it will kind of play out?
It feels like we're kind of going through constant chopping and changing of working out which tracks are good for sprints and which tracks aren't. And we've had Brazil since season 1, and that was all right. So they've stuck with it. Austria has been all right. Everything else hasn't really worked. I don't really know, because if I'm honest, what are we judging sprints on? I think probably the way obviously the spectacle, the way it kind of sets things up for the race as well. Given the races over 2022 and 2023 haven't been particularly, let's say, they haven't been all-time classics, let's say, it's kind of hard to see the sprint being anything beyond that. But, again, it might be the case that, if someone's going to risk a set of soft tyres and try something crazy, it might just work. But it's kind of hard to see given the nature of the races over the past couple of years.
And on that topic of soft tyres, Haydn, do you reckon you could talk us through the tyre compounds that we're bringing from Pirelli this weekend? Because it's, I'd say, quite a dramatic change in conditions and track expectations from Shanghai a couple of weeks ago.
That's right. It should be much hotter, much more humid than China was. But it's the same compound set, yes. Softs, C4, medium C3 and hard C2. And obviously we also assumed the track surface itself to be very different from China, given that China was such a huge unknown with the treatment that they'd done to the track before anyone had got to the circuit, knowing that had happened. Going on last year's data and running, let's say, so they've stuck with the same range of compounds compared to last year, and it was notable that the soft would only really be good for 1 or 2 laps, like qualifying for sure, a really useful tyre. But then, going into the Grand Prix, those that started on it were off it after 4 or 5 laps because it's just giving up the ghost and falling off that cliff. Whereas hards were good for 50 laps or good for a lot of the of the stint. Everyone largely stuck to the one stopper, which should be the case, assuming obviously we don't factor in any sort of safety cars or undue weather. But yeah, I would largely assume the Grand Prix will be a fairly fail-safe one-stopper, starting on the mediums, going to the hards. The sprint will be the one where you ask the question, because is anyone sensible or brave enough, depending on your disposition, to go for a soft tyre in the sprint? It sort of worked going back to China. It sort of worked for those that did it in the sprint, but it's hard to know, because it always gets to that sort of last 4 or 5 laps of your sprint race, and then the tyre life is fading. Those that have mediums that would be direct behind just come charging through. So I think that in terms of the tyre compounds, it'll be one to keep an eye out for the sprint, but I think the Grand Prix will be a fairly straightforward encounter.
And it will be interesting to see how strategy makes up the race and whether different strategies will start to play a part. What can we kind of expect from the pit stop strategies in the race, JBL? Are we going to see a one-stopper, two-stopper? What are we looking for?
I'm going to base it off last year, and unfortunately, and as we all know, more stops equals more variance equals more fun. It looks like it's going to be a set of one-stoppers, but that is taking into account if people are going for just a simple medium-hard strategy, or starting off with softs and going through from hards to the end of the race. What we might get is, it kind of depends on how much humidity we get. It depends on whether we're going to get this very, very sunny Miami weather, which we should be able to do. But if it's hot, then we're going to get more thermal day, particularly if the track is very, very high temperature. It's also very traction limited as well, so the rears are going to be going away earlier than the fronts. So it might get to a point where we might enter two-stop territory. Let's wait and see on that. We'll see if anybody takes a bit of a gamble. But yeah, just based on the last couple of years, probably a one-stopper, but there's probably room for two somewhere.
Somewhere in there, potentially there could be a safety car. But just on the topic of variables in the race, who do we think the track is most suited to? Obviously, Red Bull had quite the commanding lead last year. Are we going to say that they're probably going to be far ahead of the field again?
Yeah, I would say let's take them out of the equation for the starters of what the information we have now from previous races this season, and obviously Miami Grand Prix just gone, is Red Bull will be ahead of the field and should be fairly comfortable, all things being well. How do you decide the rest of the order from after that is probably the hardest question going into this weekend. Look at China, for example. McLaren were, as they often have done, played down expectations, didn't say the car, they didn't feel the car suited the circuit and the sort of corner characteristics, and many did believe that, yeah, Ferrari themselves thought they would be the sort of best behind Red Bull, and when it came to the Grand Prix, they just missed out to Lando Norris in the McLaren. So arguably you could say, yeah, there's arguments for, I'd say, Ferrari being still that next behind Red Bull, but I don't think you can rule out anyone like a McLaren or an Aston Martin or even Mercedes, who also are bringing some upgrades. So yeah, it's a really tough one to call, because there's so many factors involved, which we just talked about there. Tyres, how they behave with them, the circuit characteristics, the weather, given the inherent strengths and weaknesses of each team's cars, and then of course the upgrades that are coming that could sway it. And it's Fred Vasseur himself has said that, and I think largely that pack agrees with this, is about a tenth or even less than that in terms of outright performance between those sort of Ferrari, Aston, McLaren, Mercedes pack, and just a simple upgrade that gives you half a tenth there, you suddenly go from that fifth fastest to the second fastest. So yeah, we could say here and now Ferrari will be the quickest just behind Red Bull, but if everyone gets a jump on them and things swing away from Ferrari, they could end up being fifth fastest.
And we talked kind of about the faster cars, the ones that are just behind Red Bull. What about behind that, JBL? Haas have, been running fairly well, the RBs as well. What are the potential for, the midfield cars or the cars towards the back to do well this track?
We've got a bit of a mixed bag, because we've got RB coming in with a few upgrades, so that should perhaps give them a couple of tenths. We had Haas's upgrades last weekend that seemed to work very, very well. Which is a stark contrast to last year, where they waited until Austin to bring their upgrades. None of them worked. This year looks like a complete reversal of that. So Haas looks in a good place, and it should have, it's got another practice session, another sprint weekend to kind of unlock a little bit more from that car. And both Alpines are going to have the new upgrades as well. So just Esteban Ocon had that in China. Pierre Gasly's going to get the lighter car this weekend, which he reckons he should be able to do a decent job with. I think he only was behind Esteban Ocon by about 0.2 seconds last weekend. And he was sort of like trying not to be a little bit smug about it, because he was like, well, if I had the new car, I'd be ahead and that kind of thing. So that battle is still very much on amongst the Alpines. So it's closing up, I think. Alpine's not the kind of, let's say, comedy team that it was at the start of the season. We're just waiting on Williams Williams should have its spare chassis this weekend. Whether it's been able to get any upgrades alongside that, or whether it's had to put them to one side, we'll have to wait and see a little bit. But it is closing up that pack. We've got this sort of good battle between RB and Haas, I think, at the front of that, and then the other three sort of battling here and there. So I'm not 100% sure about the order. I think RB will probably be ahead of that order, but you can never discount the others.
Exactly. We'll just have to wait and see. But in other news, moving away from kind of the on-track action, this week in Formula One has been very busy with lots of news coming out and silly season really taking full force. We touched up on it a little bit, JBL and I, last week, but the Red Bull saga continues with Adrian Newey being set to leave Red Bull. We have it on good authority that there is a lot of truth to this rumour. What are the comments coming out of Red Bull? Because they're contrasting a little bit with what we've heard, JBL.
Yeah, it's basically trying to play down everything. And as you obviously would if you were, in charge of the kind of PR of that team, obviously the fact that a figurehead is set to walk out the exit door, that's something you kind of want to mitigate a little bit. And the discussion is basically that Newey has discussed concerns, but he is contracted until the end of 2025. So this depends on what he's going to do next, whether he's going to try and get himself out of his contract early, whether he just basically rides it out until 2025, which means he'll have sort of some input on the 2026 regulations. But it's probably better for both parties that if this is the way, then he'll take a long period of gardening leave. Does he retire after that? Does he go to another team? He won't be able to join another team until 2027 the start of 2027 at the earliest. So there's kind of a lot of back and forth. The fact that we've got Newey wanting to leave and Red Bull basically sharing the terms and conditions, let's say, of his contract. So it'd be interesting to see what the next step is here, because this is certainly something that's not over.
Oh, absolutely. And we will keep you updated as more on this story is shared throughout the rest of the year. Another signing that we saw was that Audi have dipped into the driver market. They have signed the German Nico Hülkenberg. He's spoken with us and he said that the prospect of competing for Audi is something very special. To represent the factory team of such a car brand with a power unit made in Germany is a great honour for me. So as you can see, there's a lot of pride there and excited to see him driving for a German outfit. Haydn, what are your thoughts on this?
It's a sensible signing. It's probably not the most exciting of signings, but I guess if you're Audi, what are you looking for from one of your drivers who clearly made the push for this decision, is a safe pair of hands and an experienced pair of hands. Now, in Nico Hülkenberg, you have that in abundance. He's granted he's never had that opportunity with, say, a top team, and who knows, maybe this becomes that shot. If Audi absolutely nail those engine regs, then who knows? But at least in terms of where Audi will expect themselves to be and where they aim to go, Hülkenberg will have the experience, the knowledge of other teams, of the current engine rules, and generally going forward to the transition of what they'll be needing to do. And that connection with the brand, he's had that previously, and I think that generally it will put them in good stead. It will, I guess, the interesting bit, which to give some credit to Audi, is what happens with the other spot in the team. Now we know that they seem fairly interested in getting Carlos Sainz's services, given he's out of contract and out of Ferrari at the end of this year. But then that lays up what happens with the likes of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. They, at least one of them, seemed fairly certain that they would be hanging around for this transition period. But let's say if Sainz does end up going to Audi, then they're both out of a gig. And where do they go in this silly season rotor? One question answered, and then it's just thrown up about two or three others. So that's sort of the joy of this silly season at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. There is no expectations. We're just enjoying the ride, should we say. But we're on the 6th round of the championship right now, which only the 6th. I feel like has been many more. But we've started to see teams bring more upgrades, as you've both alluded to. There are many upgrades coming in for the Miami Grand Prix this weekend. Talking about McLaren, they've said this upgrade will not be as big as the 2 that we had delivered last year in Austria and Singapore, but it should be a decent step, said team principal Andrea Stella. It should be noticeable, though. JBL, what do we kind of make of that? If we're talking about McLaren being up there in fighting for, the second position behind Red Bull. If their upgrades aren't as great, could it be that, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston may be in with more of a chance?
I think it's more of the fact that the team had to make such big strides last season because it was towards the back and it had to basically tack on a massive upgrade package in Austria to actually get something out of the car. It's now starting the season in a much better position. It doesn't have to go through that. It doesn't have to go through the basically trying to dig something out of the year. So I think the magnitude's not quite as big, but it doesn't have to do quite as much to reach the front. So it's not going to be of that scale, but there should still be quite a lot of bits on that car. We don't know what they are yet, and we won't find out until Thursday or Friday. But there should be a few tweaks to, not only consolidate McLaren's position in that sort of top 3, top 4, but push forward as well, start challenging Ferrari for second. Because I think that's the main rival. I don't think Mercedes are sort of in it at the moment, and I don't think Aston Martin are either. I think it's very much game on between McLaren and Ferrari.
Game on indeed. And moving on to Ferrari, as you mentioned, they announced a new sponsor last week with HP becoming the title sponsor, but the team have also teased a very special livery for the Miami Grand Prix. Haydn, what's kind of the story behind this? Because there is a bit of history there, isn't there?
That's right. Ferrari are turning blue, which sounds almost sacrilegious when you think of Ferrari and obviously they're scarlet red. But it has been seen before. It is actually a mark back to their heritage and their history in the US racing scene as Ferrari, going back 60 years, in fact, of when they sort of made the breakthrough. And the cars that were run by the customer teams there, they ran in sort of the blues of an Argentina and a darker shade of blue to match with the heritage of the teams going through that period. So we're going to see a lot of like a throwback look to really amplify and celebrate Ferrari's history racing in Formula One and sports cars. As you said, we've been shown what the race suits will look like, and I think that was a tribute, let's say, to the likes that when John Surtees and Chris Amon were racing in the 60s wearing that sort of blue look, and the mechanics, Enzo Ferrari often liked his mechanics wearing that sort of lighter shade of blue, and it obviously brings a nice contrast to the red. So we know what the race suits look like. Will it mirror it exactly like that, or will it be a bit of a darker blue? It can't be certain until we see it in Miami, and they will present it ahead of the race weekend. But expect it to look very, very different. And of course, I don't necessarily think these two things are 100% connected, but it is a handy tie-in of, obviously, like I said, with the HP title sponsorship. Their colours are blue and white, so it works out quite well for all involved. I'm sure their prominence will be very clear as well. So it ticks a marketing box, it ticks a sponsorship box for Ferrari, and in terms of really trying to make a mark in this race and make a mark in the US market, that is what Ferrari have gone for, and I'm excited to see what it looks like.
Absolutely, it's perfect timing. I'm also very excited to see that, and I'm sure it will go down in the history books. Let us know in the comments which throwback liveries you'd like to see throughout the rest of the season. But guys, JVL, Haydn, I would like to thank you very much for your time today, and I would like to remind everyone watching and listening that sprint qualifying is on a Friday and the sprint is on the Saturday morning, just as we get used to this brand new format. Remember, if you've enjoyed what you've seen today, please subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our coverage of the F1 2024 season. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.